Rukmini, and I'm a Rotary Peace Fellow, and this event is brought to you by the Rotary Peace Fellows Alumni Association, as well as the Rotary Fellowship for Global Development, the Rotary Action Group for Refugees, Forced Displacement and Migration, and we're also partnered with Christian Action in Hong Kong. The flow for today, this is a 90-minute event. We will begin with a short music video, which is performed by an all-women's orchestra from Afghanistan as a tribute to the country and to the women of Afghanistan. We will then move to a sharing, a moderated discussion with the two speakers that we have on the call, followed by a TED talk by our third speaker, who unfortunately could not join us today because unfortunately one of her family members was killed today, and yeah, that speaks to the gravity of the situation as well. And we hope to leave the second half of the call, so about 40 to 45 minutes towards the later half of the call, for questions as well as interaction with the audience. So I'm sure those of us who've been attending our events in the past are familiar with who we are at the Rotary Peace Fellows Alumni Association. We are a network of close to about 1,400 Peace Fellows located around the world. And our intention is to facilitate better collaboration with Rotary and also collaborate with each other through peace projects around the globe. The two speakers that we have for today, I'm only going to name them and leave it to them later to have a better introduction of them. But we're glad to have Jennifer with us. Jennifer is from the Christian Action Group in Hong Kong. And she's, of course, from a career perspective, she is a musician. She also ran a music school in the past. And she was also, in the Afghan context, she was involved with the National Institute of Music in Afghanistan in the past. She will speak more about herself and the current work that she is involved with as we go along. We also have Robin with us. Robin is a program manager with the Catholic Charities of Dallas Brady Senior Center. And she, again, has a professional association with music. She plays the clarinet. And she also had an association with the National Institute of Music in Afghanistan. Both of them will share more about their work as we go along today. For those of us who joined in late, welcome. And through the conversation, please keep yourself on mute so that we minimize background noise. We are expecting some people from Afghanistan to join in as well, and perhaps that there are some of us from Afghanistan because we had specifically asked them to join in with false names. So in case you are a resident of Afghanistan at this point, please note that this call is being recorded and live streamed, so please keep your videos off. At any point in the conversation, you can put up your questions and comments on the chat. We will attempt to weave it into our conversation where it's possible. Otherwise, we will respond to the questions in the later part of the conversation. So with that, Spencer, could we begin with the video of Vatan Jan? Vatan Jan is a patriotic song, and this performance that you're about to see is performed by an all-women orchestra called Zora, which was affiliated with the Afghan National Institute of Music.
Rukmini, if you don't hear the voice, let me know, okay?
Sure. The woman you saw conducting the orchestra is Zarifa Diba, who was supposed to be our third speaker for today, who unfortunately could not be with us because of a loss in her family. One of her family members was killed, unfortunately, today in Afghanistan. The context of this call, of course, is everything that is happening in Afghanistan in the last few weeks, but particularly the fact that around the 20th of August, the Taliban stormed into the Afghanistan National Institute of Music, destroyed practically every musical instrument that was in the institute, and effectively closed down the school. And we have with us today two speakers who have previously been associated as teachers at the school, and this conversation goes forward from here. So Jennifer and Robin, welcome. And Jennifer, if I could start with you. Could you say a little bit about yourself, about your association with music, and of course, with Afghanistan?
Certainly. Thank you so much for having us here and for giving us this platform to share about a different side of Afghanistan that most people don't usually see. I would actually like to say, just looking at the guests here, there are actually 3 teachers from Afghanistan National Institute of Music, as I saw one of my former colleagues has joined, so welcome, Lauren. As Rukmini said, my name is Jennifer Forta. My background is in violin. I ran a Suzuki Music School here in Hong Kong for about 13 years before taking what was supposed to be a sabbatical to Kabul to teach at the Afghanistan National Institute of Music. I was supposed to be there for 9 months, but I stayed for 2 years instead, as the country has quite a way of grabbing onto you, and the students and the colleagues and the school, everything has a way of just grabbing onto you. I can share a little bit of my time when I was there, as well as some of the background as to why the school was so important and is still so important. I'm sure everybody is thinking quite a lot about the first rule of the Taliban back in 1996 to 2001. Quite famously, music was banned during that time, but actually the ban on music started even before the Taliban came into power, and had its roots in the refugee camps where the Taliban itself was kind of born. So it wasn't just those 5 years that music was banned in Afghanistan. It was kind of a slow march of the erosion of musical and cultural rights that took place. And then famously, of course, during the Taliban rule, everything was completely outlawed. Then I'm sure you can recognize this very, very famous photo of what it was like back in those times in the 90s, when the Taliban would go around and tear out the cassette tapes and videotapes and destroy things and kind of display these haram, or what they believed to be these haram things. Many of my students from when I was at ANIM, the older students would share stories about what it was like when they were growing up during the Taliban regime. One student in particular, his story has always stuck with me. He said that even as a small child, he was very interested in music, and his parents, of course, they wanted him to be safe, but they also wanted him to be happy. And he told me that the family had a cassette player, and he used to take the cassette player and secretly go outside to listen to music, hiding in a drain pipe near his home. And one time he was caught by one of the Talibs, and he was probably only 5 or 6 at the time. And of course, the Taliban destroyed the cassette player and then beat this small child, and his father was put into jail. So this is just one of a myriad of examples of what the restriction was like, and what we are all fearing right now. I'm just going to skip ahead to talk about Afghanistan National Institute of Music, since so many of us are affiliated with the school, and since this is where I spent several years of my life. Although there are several music schools now in Afghanistan that proliferated post-2010, Afghanistan National Institute of Music is definitely the most prolific. The performing groups have gone all over the world. They famously formed the Zohra Orchestra, which you just saw performing at the World Economic Forum there. When I was there, we developed the combination Western and Afghan traditional music ensembles, whereby the Afghan traditional ensembles would play Western music on traditional instruments and vice versa, and then we would all play together. At the time, Anim was pretty much the only group of people who were capable of playing the Afghan National Anthem. So when we were there, we were called on regularly to perform for the president, for any sort of important political event, openings of schools, celebrations, you name it, we were there performing the national anthem. And so the children, the students there had so much exposure all over the country, all over the news, and became quite famous. I know Robin will be able to speak a lot more about students that are musicians once they were no longer in Anim and how prolifically they were performing as well. But here you can see this was a recording that we did of the National Children's Song, where the children were able to perform in a beautiful venue. A wonderful video was created. And yeah, I just like to highlight the performances and the recordings that we did, because there is record of all of these things that the children did, that the students did, boys and girls together, performing music that is now in danger of being outlawed again. While I was there at Anim, within the first few months, one of our performances was attacked by a suicide bomber. Wonderfully, none of our students were injured, but my boss, Dr. Ahmed Sarmas, was critically injured. And he ended up having to go back to Australia for treatment, but because of his gumption, he came back, and the school continued. Over the course of the few years that I was working there, there were a few incidents whereby the Taliban, I wouldn't say that they raided us, but there were reports of Talibs climbing over the fence at our school, which resulted in larger security presence and building higher walls and taking more security measures to keep the students and the staff safe. But throughout all of it, the school continued and the music continued. Yeah, now today, things are changing quite rapidly. I think just today, I'm in Hong Kong, so my today is over, and I've already been hearing terrible news out of the country. I've learned that today boys were invited to go back to school, but girls were not. There was already segregation taking place, but now the secondary school seems restricted only to males. And also the Ministry of Women's Affairs was replaced this week by the infamous Ministry for Propagation of Virtue and Prevention of Vice. This was the ministry that sent the foot soldiers out onto the street to beat women who were accidentally showing their ankles or who were walking around unaccompanied, and who pulled musicians out of their homes and had them destroy their instruments. So I've been speaking with a lot of my students lately who are quite afraid, who are quite desperate, asking by any means necessary, can you help get us out of here? Can you change something in our lives? Can you send money? Can you send protection? Do you have any friends still in Pakistan that can house me? This sort of thing. The situation is getting more and more dire, and again, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to share a little bit of that. Now, I'm not going to take up too much time because I know that Robin has quite a lot to share as well that will complement my own experience. I did have the pleasure of overlapping with Robin for a little bit and have been following her work for quite a long time. So Robin, I will turn it over to you now.
Jennifer and Robin, welcome to the conversation. And if you could, in fact, start off with the same question, a little bit about yourself, your music, and very importantly, your connection with Afghanistan.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rukmini. I really appreciate you and Spencer putting this together and inviting me to be part of it along with Jennifer. She reached out and I was like, yes, absolutely. I'm happy to share what I can about this important conversation. My fear is that the issues of Afghanistan are like many other issues today, just going to be a drop in the bucket and we go on to the next day and it's the issue for the day, you know, the Congress or the budget or whatever. But there are still people whose lives are greatly at risk, as Jennifer alluded to. I also am in touch with probably 35 people at minimum on a daily basis, morning and night, trying to just help them stay strong and to help them in whatever way I can as they are still dealing with increasing restrictions on the ground in Kabul and in Herat. I'm a clarinetist by trade. I have been a professional musician for most of my life. And I remember when the Taliban first came into rule, I was in no position to do anything about it. But when I had a call from a former friend or colleague asking me to come out and participate with the Afghanistan National Institute of Music Winter Academy, this was back in 2014, I was in a place at that point to say yes and to be able to come and do something to support young women in their education and musicians whose voices had previously been quieted. So I was absolutely thrilled to be able to go for just 2 weeks, and that 2 weeks has made a big difference since. Like Jennifer said, there is something about Afghanistan, the people, the place that really grabs you. And it's once you're there, once you're part of it, it doesn't leave you and you don't really leave it. So I was there for 2 brief weeks, worked with a lot of different colleagues and had the opportunity to work with a number of students who became mentees. So for the subsequent 7 years, I have participated with some continued video instruction with them through the school. I've also picked up additional people who are intellectuals and human rights defenders who have asked me for anything from like English editing or assistance with scholarship applications to just kind of friendship and understanding what it's like on the other side of life. So it's been my privilege to stay in touch with a number of people through that time. I also have a brief slide presentation, so I'll just go ahead and start that and kind of talk through it so that we can see. Give me just a second to get this up. Okay, so this is from a show that I had put together after my time in Kabul. It's very much like my home country of Albuquerque, New Mexico, very high and dry, just a beautiful place. There are a lot of buildings that tourists go to that are kind of bombed out relics like Darulaman Palace. You know, we think it's kind of interesting to go to these places that have been destroyed. In fact, the people there are so strong. I love this picture of the young man looking out over the city, just kind of, you know, thinking whatever. There's so much creativity and so much desire for the country to continue to grow and progress in the ways that it has, both for women and for young men. There's been so much opportunity that they have made for themselves and through association with the Americans and with other countries as well. And so, you know, I would like to say that as much as we're concerned about the women, and very much rightly so, the young men are also very much at risk for losing their dreams and their economy. There's a lot of beauty in Afghanistan, you know, natural resources, lapis, handwork, it's an amazing place, again, just for creativity generally, music and visual arts combined. One of the things that struck me about my time there is that music really is very universal. This is just a walk in a garden where you can hear prayer coming out. And whether or not you're Muslim, I mean, these prayers really speak to you. You're there and you hear them 5 times a day. You wake up with them, you go to bed with them. Music is clearly everywhere, and it's incredibly expressive, and it is it's very spiritual. And I think that anybody who is performing music or in the arts, that speaks to you. I mean, that's just part of how you give back to the world. It's a very important part of you. And one of the clients that I'm currently working with is a teacher in Herat, and he's just said, early on when this all started, it was like, a real struggle. I saw the 2 or 3 days before Afghanistan started to shut down, people just putting out music videos. A lot of them were making music videos, whether it was in a studio, whether it was at home, they were sharing their music. And it was kind of like this last pronunciation, if you will, of here's who I am and here is what I need to be doing in the world. And it was just beautiful, but it was also heartbreaking, because in the next week, what people were sending me were pictures of their instruments in drawers, or as you'll see later, their instruments being destroyed. And they were telling me about having to hide their instruments, and they were struggling with whether or not to continue teaching their students underground and to continue their educational efforts. And they've mentioned things like, I will just be like a seed that is underground, and I will continue to grow until it is time for me to come back and be a full plant again. As Jennifer alluded to, the number of women that have been able to be nurtured through the Afghanistan National Institute of Music is pretty profound. Here I've blocked out the faces of some of the young girls that I worked with. During the first rule with the Taliban, teachers were 70% women, 70% of the teachers prior to the Taliban rule were women, and maybe 50% were civil servants. However, there were a lot of restrictions that came on afterwards. Maybe only 3% of girls receiving any primary education during Taliban rule, a lot of restrictions even on medical treatment. One of my folks that I'm in touch with daily just let me know yesterday that, again, per the ministry changes that Jennifer alluded to, there has been a new encouragement in Kabul for men to basically flog their women 40 times a day as part of new recommendations. So while we were there, I don't know about Jennifer, but for me, I stayed in a compound. It's an armed compound. It's got barbed wire around it. You don't go in or you don't go out, and hopefully other people don't come in. But it's a very difficult way to live. There are a number of single women head of households that I know right now who can't go out to get groceries. They're restricted from any kind of movement outside. And so, and they don't, most people don't have money at this point either, but for these single women, it's incredibly difficult to live if you don't have a male patron of some sort. Many people who have fled the country in the past 7 years, when I was there in 2014, it was relatively safe, but immediately afterwards, it started becoming less so. The French National or Cultural Center bombing that Jennifer alluded to happened shortly after I was there. And things just seemed to kind of get worse with more sniper shootings and things like that of very prominent guests from other countries. So compounds can be safe, but they're also, again, very challenging in many ways. Jennifer alluded to the Taliban decrees, and I've just noted here in bold, the one about preventing music to be broadcast by public information resources and shops, hotels, vehicles. If a music cassette's found, as she said, they would be removed. One of the things that really, looking back from my time there in 2014, at that point, my understanding was that the Afghanistan National Institute of Music was really kind of the primary driver of music making. They were doing embassy concerts, they were doing concerts at the French Cultural Institute, they were touring abroad, and more of that happened after I left. But after that, the alumni, the students that I was working with in the next 3 to 5 years became the people who were working for Ariana TV, Tolo TV, RTA, their morning shows that they were doing live music on. They were playing pretty successfully wedding events. They were making probably more than the national average income just playing weddings and events. They weren't doing much teaching unless they were teaching at the school, but they were doing things like performing for the Afghan National Forces and doing rock concerts outside. And so this is a huge blossoming of music that started from the seed at Afghanistan National Music. There's also another group called Aga Khan that works in the country. There's also the Institute of Herat that was founded, and their founder has taught at the embassies for years, Indian and Persian music. So just a lot of creativity blossoming and coming out into the public. So again, some of the other rules the Taliban had previously were to prevent music and dances and wedding parties. It says in case the violation, the head of family will be arrested and punished. And I can't emphasize enough the danger, not only to the musicians, but to their extended relatives. So Jennifer and I have been pretty careful to make sure we're not showing faces of people that are currently in Afghanistan. It is very possible for the father or the mother of a child who had been at the school to be harmed. I have heard about students whose siblings have fled the country being flogged because they're associated with them or trying to protect them and say, no, they're not a musician. I've had some pictures of a gentleman who was a janitor at the Music Institute losing his thumbs. Very graphic pictures of his thumbs being cut off for his work as a janitor, not only at the Institute, but also at American buildings. So the rule number 13 to prevent the playing of the music drum, the tabla is kind of, if there's anything that's kind of the center of Afghan life, I would say it's the tabla, this instrument that is just beautifully played. A lot of tabla players make their money at weddings, at events. It is a beautiful instrument, and again, one of the ones that's being destroyed currently. At the Afghanistan National Institute of Music, one of the things that they had really emphasized, and Jennifer alluded to the National Anthem, the clarinet instructor there had written this, and to the bottom left corner where it's saying everybody's treated with respect and dignity, the National Anthem really speaks to the importance of everybody being unified in Afghanistan. So it really tries to bring the emphasis away from tribal affiliations to more of a national identity, as much as the school is educating boys and girls equally, and they have come to expect that Western standard. That's really not something that's happening even at the university level. So in universities, men and women would not necessarily be expected to even speak to each other, even if they're walking outside the class. Certainly not inside the classroom. So it's a very different westernized, democratized system that, again, has kind of flourished outside of the Institute as well, and become much more egalitarian and more forward thinking. So this current generation of students and people that are being impacted by the Taliban rule are probably suffering more than the people would have 10 years ago, because they have a very different level of expectation. They had started a boarding, possibly a boarding school, I think, on site, but they also partnered with AFSICO. Oh, sorry, hold on. I've got music first. We got 3 quick music. You'll hear everything from this kind of fusion. Yeah, the kind of stuff there. Everything like from that to oops, sorry, hold on just a sec. That's a sitar and tabla combination. And then one of the young men that I was mentoring, he attempted to come over to the States to go to Interlochen Arts Academy and was not able to get his visa approved for that. Prior to that, I had successfully helped another young man come out. His name is Basit Azizi. He just this week was able to play taps along with the principal trumpeter in the Philadelphia Orchestra at the World War I memorial in Washington, D.C. He continues to be a huge ambassador here and a good example of how it really takes a village I worked with David Bilger, the principal trumpet in Philly, who I knew here in Dallas, to help Bassett kind of get a footing to get his application into Interlochen, help fundraise for him. Steve Leisering at Kansas University later kind of picked up the cause, as did a second sponsor past me, in order to be able to help him continue his studies at Kansas University. He's currently shifted from doing work in just music to doing, I think he's got 3 degrees under his belt right now that he's trying to finish. One is political science, one is international relations. I can't remember what the other one is. He did an internship in forestry of all things. But it really speaks to the drive that these young people have if they have opportunity to bring that to fruition. So Bassett is a great example, and if you're interested in any more information, you can certainly contact me afterwards. The young gentleman who I was trying to bring over on clarinet, Bassett's a trumpet player. The young gentleman who I brought over or tried to bring over on clarinet is a very gifted young man as well. And here's just a little bit of his music. And I would say he was probably 14 when he was putting this together. So just to say that there's a broad range of music that they offer to the world, and again, a lot of drive and creativity as well. One of the things about the Afghanistan National Institute of Music that I think was true in the Herat Institute as well is that they're really providing much broader services than just music education. They are going out into the streets and finding street children who would be making their families living and offering the family a stipend so that these children can come and be educated at the school instead of working on the street. As you can see here, just in 2009, there were 70,000 street children in Kabul. When you're driving through the city, they're begging at your door of your car. You'll have flocks of them around your car just trying to get money, food, anything. And so groups like ANIM or the Institute of Herat are really trying to help them with education, food, with all the things that they need to be a whole person and to be able to be creative in life. Briefly, at the Institute of Music, I met Jennifer there, as well as a number of other great colleagues. We're still in touch with each other, and a lot of us are now participating in what's called an International Coalition for Afghan Musicians. We are trying to find solutions worldwide, whether that's sponsorship, visa opportunities, connections with schools that might help some of these students to have a long-term resettlement program. And so this amazing group, again, has just kind of continued to work together for the behalf of musicians since leaving. Just a little bit about AFSECO. This is a boarding school that is not just for orphans, but has brought a lot of students from outside provinces to Kabul to study. So whereas students may not have had a chance to get an education in their hometown, they can come here and receive very good care. The older students often stay on as mentors and teachers for the younger students. It is one of the programs that may still be able to accept donations and to be able to help a certain number of both musicians and non-musicians. All of their students are currently housed elsewhere. The school has been shuttered for fear of problems, just like Afghanistan National Institute of Music. One of the AFSECO children did this painting up top left just days after the Taliban took over Kabul. And that's become pretty popular. I've seen that on a lot of my contacts, Facebook pages, or other profile pictures. The other picture is actually from RTA, from the radio television studio, where again, within the first week or two, the Taliban came in and destroyed all of the instruments. So these things are not easily replaced. In the first time that the Taliban were here, I know a lot of instruments were moved off-site, were moved to safe places. I remember when I was at the Afghanistan National Institute of Music, there was great excitement about a harp having been found in a cave somewhere in eastern Afghanistan. And people were just thrilled that there was a harp that was available somewhere in the country. So for all these instruments to be destroyed, it is not easy. There are some instrument makers, but to replace these is going to be very difficult. I'll take the resources off because I think there's going to be opportunities to look at that later. But just to say that there are a number of opportunities, I think, for anybody who is connected with people in Afghanistan already, or maybe people who are interested in helping with refugees, to have kind of some of these fuller relationships. I invite you, as we're going through the course of the process today, just to think about, where might I be able to make those connections? What might I be able to offer, whether it's a resource, a friendly face, help across the border with somebody who's in a refugee camp. There's a lot of different ways that we can be present, that we can help. And part of that certainly is just keeping this issue front and center.
Thanks, Robin. And yeah, I see that some members of our audience have joined as Jennifer and you spoke. So welcome, everyone. If questions emerge for you as we go through this conversation, please post them on the chat and we'll take them up as we go along. So Robin, since you mentioned this, I'm going to ask you to speak about this a little more. Particularly coming from a space of concern for youth. We're talking about a country whose median age is about 18 years, which means practically half the population has been born in and has grown up with relative freedom. They've grown up with music, they've grown up with culture. And so what does it mean to lose music, to lose art? And are there any practical ways in which we can support them?
That's a good question. It's music, it's art, it's just basic human rights as well. 3 or 4 of the young women that I was working with when this started were athletes, and just their daily commentary was, I can't go outside, I can't do my sport anymore. I cannot exist in the world in my physical body in the way that I want to. Similarly for the musicians, I can't play anymore, I can't sing anymore, I cannot exercise my creative rights. So I think if there's anybody that you're aware of, it's a bit tricky right now. Even in this presentation, we don't really want to share too much about people's details. We don't want to share what they play, what their names are, what the name of their band is, because it's just not safe to do much of this. Certainly not on Facebook. That's probably one of the least safe places. Twitter may not be so much either. So in terms of trying to amplify their voices, that's a very difficult thing to do publicly right now. But I think we can have private conversations, and we can have conversations with people who have some power and some opportunity to take this cause forward, whether that's educators or whether that's your local official or a journalist that you might know who could help get the word out. I think that's probably one of the biggest things. I'd like to read something from a teacher that I am working with in Herat. He is, I've been asking him to give me his personal information so that I could possibly support him through an Artistic Freedom Initiative visa opportunity. And what he keeps sending me are profiles of his students. And that's, it's just speaks to the communal nature of this group. But he's also a poet, and he just sent me this yesterday. He says, please publish in newspapers and magazines and make programs on TV and give interviews and advertisements. Please launch a fundraising campaign. Ask the artist to hold a painting exhibition and art gallery. To support us, ask the readers to hold small, big, and street concerts. To support us, ask the theater artists to perform. Ask the circuses to perform. Ask the big businessmen and production companies not to spend money on advertising and to support us if they can save us. Ask us to become more famous and popular. Ask athletes and sports clubs to launch competitions to support us. Ask the common people to fast a meal for our salvation. So I think, one of the things that's important to note is that the median age also reflects the number of people that have been killed in Afghanistan. So many of the cases that I'm working with are 20 years old, and they have had numerous family members killed, whether they're younger or older. One of the boys that I'm working with, young men at this point, he was present at the French Institute bombing that happened. And his brother had received a full scholarship to Afghanistan, or American University in Kabul, American University of Afghanistan, in 2016, and was killed on his second day of classes during the first sniper shooting, the first American style shooting that happened there. Numerous other cousins in that family had been killed previously. So, and numerous people, unfortunately, as with our other speakers' family today, are being killed on a daily basis. So again, I think the important thing to understand is just that it's not just music that's being killed, it's actual people. And we really need to press to keep this, this cause front and center so that people are aware of it, so that, you know, without being a total downer, just certainly we need to let people know why it's important and what is at risk. And the music is part of that. The democratic principles that people have grown up with are important. But it's also the fact that, you know, the lives are important. And as much as possible, I think those will be slowly squashed unless there's some kind of continued emphasis on intervention, whether that is on not so much evacuations, but resettlement, or making something more secure on the ground.
Thanks, Robin. Jennifer, would you like to add to what Robin shared?
Sure. Yeah, actually what she just said right now was, you know, really hits home that it is not just the music that's being lost, but actual human lives. When I was doing my master's degree, actually I should throw in there, because of my experience in Afghanistan, it changed me so much. I decided that I needed a total career change. And so I went back to school, which is how I met Spencer. I did a degree at Chulalongkorn in Bangkok, and my research was on Afghan refugees in Indonesia. And many of the refugees there that I was working with and doing research with had been musicians. And I spoke with several of them. And one of my very general questions for my research was, what did you bring with you when you fled the country? And I will never forget this. This one guy said, I brought my harmonium. And if you don't know what a harmonium is, it's basically like an accordion that is encased in wood. It weighs like 30, 40, 50 pounds. I don't know. I've never picked one up. They're huge and they're so heavy. And, you know, he had fled at a time where people were crossing, they were trying to reach Australia from Indonesia on boats. And he brought with him this giant thing instead of bringing clothes or food or a cell phone. And his roommate said, oh yeah, I brought my tabla. And I said, oh, how many? He said like 6. And a tabla, you know, these drums, the bass ones are also huge. So these musicians were doing anything they could to preserve that thing that made them them. And they said, you know, they're taking our lives, and we're fleeing with our lives, but our lives are not worth living if we can't have the music that we've dedicated our entire lives to. So, you know, everything that Robin was saying just really, really strikes home that, you know, humanity, human lives and culture are so inextricably entwined. You know, as this crisis is unfolding and unfolding, yes, like things are going silent there. Lives are going silent, and I fear that just like the last 20 years, though, the world is going to kind of forget about Afghanistan again. You know, it's very sensational right now, but after a few weeks, what's going to happen? There will be a wildfire somewhere, another spike in COVID, and people will be like, "Oh, the Afghans," you know. So everything that Robin was saying and that her contacts were saying about, you know, don't forget Afghanistan. I think this is the best thing that any of us can do is remember there are 35 million people that are there. I know there's a lot of talk about the 120,000 that were evacuated, but there are 35 million that still remain that, you know, are losing their lives, that are losing their culture. One thing that at a recent talk that I gave, somebody asked, well, was it worth it to go and teach music in a country that was always going to outlaw it again? And that really gave me pause. And I'm sure everybody who has been in our position has had a similar thought that, oh, is music more important than bread? Is learning to play the violin more important than, you know, survival? But something that I keep thinking about is that, you know, once a kid has music in their heads and in their hearts, no matter what, that's something that internally cannot be taken away from them. It's like the one thing that they own. And I keep thinking about one of my cello students who was not particularly good at the cello, but she really loved it, and she loved music so much. And whenever she would be thinking, she would be humming. And I would ask her, oh, well, what are you doing? And she said, oh, well, when something's difficult, I need to have music, because that helps me to concentrate. It helps me to think about things. And I know that she was pulled out of school when she was like 16 and got married and probably has several kids by now. And I think about her all the time, and I think, well, I hope that while she's doing her housework, or while she's doing whatever it is that she as an Afghan woman has to do, I hope that she is still humming, and I hope that she is still having this music to accompany her life and to make something more beautiful and tolerable in her life. And yeah, I really fear that this next generation will not grow up with this anymore, because these things are being taken away now. So I guess that was a bit of a digression from your question, but I wanted to share her experience.
Thank you, Jennifer. And Robin, let me bring you back. And this is the last question from me to both of you, and we'll open it up to the audience as well. So if there were to be one request that you could make to this audience listening in today, and this is primarily a bunch of peace builders and Rotarians from around the world, what would that one request be? Robin, if you could start.
I think, and again, I very much appreciate your moderating today. This has just been a great chance to visit, and I look forward to any questions people might have. We've been talking a lot about keeping things in the spotlight, and I know Rotarians are focused on kind of the truth, on being helpful, on goodwill, on the questions of, is this beneficial to our community, what I'm doing. I think the truth is really important. So I would say continue to educate yourself, both about Afghanistan and also about current events there. Jennifer and I have direct contacts with people there daily, so we're maybe a little bit more plugged into what's actually happening on the ground. And I'm trying to share that with my circle as much as I can, just so people are aware. If you don't know somebody in Afghanistan, it's not too hard to get connected. There are a lot of communities that are welcoming refugees at this point in time. My program, Catholic Charities of Dallas, is helping with resettlement. My building actually has a whole room almost dedicated at this point to donations. Unfortunately, those are only going to people that have SIV visas, people who work directly with the US government. The next in line coming over would be possibly people with P2 or P1 visas. But currently, everything is completely stalled. There are no more evacuation flights, or very few. The borders have been pretty well controlled by the Taliban at this point in time. One of my contacts who has extremely, she was actually nominated with the Afghan cycling team for the Nobel Peace Prize. She can't get out of Kabul. She can't get across the Pakistan border. At this point in time, you have to have not only a visa, but also a letter from the Ministry of Interior to get across the border. And the ministries are closed, and Pakistan isn't really offering those letters right now anyhow. So people are stuck. And that's a really important thing to understand. There are numerous volunteers around the world that are trying to help with resettlement options, and we're volunteers. The governments have, to some extent, closed doors. I'm working with the International Coalition for Afghan Musicians, which includes people in the UK, New Zealand, let's see where else, UK, New Zealand, Canada, the United States, Mexico, Ireland, and Norway. And there's a lot of political advocacy going on. There's a new campaign coming up in the UK called No One Left Behind to try and ensure that all of these other people that Jennifer and I have talked about today, most of whom will never qualify for an SIV visa, most of whom will not either be able to get a P1 or P2 visa easily, to ensure that those people are not forgotten. So I think the one thing I would say is, again, educate yourself on what the options are. There are many options for sponsorship. And I think some of the folks in the States are starting to think about how could we do that similar to the Canadians. In Canada, they have something called a group of 5, which can sponsor. So one person alone is not required to sponsor a family, which requires sharing some tax documents and also having a certain amount of income. But some of the people in the States are talking about, well, how can we form a group of 5? Is there a church I can partner with? Is there another person I can partner with so that we can, as a village, support these people? If you happen to be living somewhere in a bordering country, sorry, my cat is playing with a marble. If you happen to be living in a bordering country, Pakistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, or know somebody there who can get close to one of these refugee camps, please, by all means, ask them to be connected and involved. So many of the people that are crossing over are similarly stuck. There's a family that I know that has been stuck in a mosque in Quetta because they cannot leave. They're Hazara. They are not free to travel. The UNHCR office is closed. They're all women. And so they can't even leave the mosque in Pakistan to get the support they need. So it's really important to understand the levels of restriction that exist. And also, again, even Bassett Azizi, the young man I mentioned, played taps at the World War I Memorial. His family has been in Dubai for at least 3 or 4 weeks. Doha is going to be no different and probably even worse. So it's a long resettlement process, but with more people engaged in it, there's hope that more people will be able to move through to the other side.
Thanks, Robin. Jennifer?
I would love to add to that. So prior to moving back here to Hong Kong, I was in Pakistan for 2 years, working with the Red Cross. And as Robin said, there are a lot of people who are trying to make their way to safety there. I know several families who were able to make it over the border before the government started to restrict that. And they're also stuck in Quetta right now. Also Hazara families with really no access to resources. Even my colleagues in the Red Cross are saying that there isn't a whole lot we can do right now, except put them in touch with UNHCR. When I spoke with UNHCR there, they are completely overwhelmed. Even my personal friends and contacts, I was saying, look, I have this family that's extremely vulnerable. They don't have visas. 2 of them don't even have passports. I have no idea how they got into the country. And she said, look, I'm getting over 1,000 requests every single day. We cannot handle this. So if there are Rotarians in Pakistan, if you could reach out to SEPAR, the organization there, or to SHARP. SHARP Pakistan is directly helping very vulnerable Afghan refugees, not the previous waves, but the new wave coming in. These are 2 organizations that are really, really trying to give support down on the ground. Now, something that, I mean, Robin is very humble, so I will brag on her behalf. Something that should be noted is that during this, that initial 2 to 3 weeks rush, it was civilians like Robin and myself and several other, thousands of others who had been previously involved with Afghanistan. We are the ones who were desperately putting people onto State Department lists, writing letters. I'm not qualified to write any of these letters, but I was writing them anyway in the hopes that maybe somehow this would help. It was not governments initially that were able to help people. And I think the same is now going to be true again, now that the big evacuation is over. It's individuals who have connections to people on the ground. One of the Indian teachers who is in this call right now, I know she has a fundraiser going for one of our students who was already outside of the country studying music in Turkey. And so Lauren has been raising funds for her to support her, because obviously she cannot go back. And, you know, this is one individual effort. I am myself and my husband, we're sending mobile phone credits to, I can't even count how many people now, because for some people, they're not able to leave their homes anymore to go down to the shop to top up their mobile phones. For others, they simply don't have any more money. And, you know, at the smallest tangible thing that can be done is helping to support people so that they don't lose touch with the outside world. So there are a lot of efforts, no matter where you are in the world. There are a lot of these individual civilian efforts, not necessarily going through big agencies that will get caught up in the bureaucracy of aid. And I say this as somebody who works for a very large bureaucratic aid organization. Right now, the best things are to support small individual people on the ground. And I'm sure Robin and I and Lauren, who's in this group, would be very, very happy if you're not concerned about getting tax receipts for your donations. We can direct you to individual people who could really, really need help. And I'm talking $10 top up is for on a mobile phone. It is a lifeline. Robin, go ahead.
I was just going to say that there are some other organizations. I think Emergency is one local organization that is doing good aid work with food. And then also PARSA, or Afghan Scouts, is another trusted resource. Afghan Scouts has been operating throughout the country for years with community building activity. And my understanding is that they may still be able to offer some of those softer supports like food and things like that.
Yes, PARSA, the Afghan Scouts, they set up makeshift IDP camps before Kabul fell. And these are like secondary school kids, basically, supported by the organization, setting up tents, distributing food, hygiene kits, non-food items, this sort of thing. Then also I've been talking with Save the Children Hong Kong here. They don't have specifically relief efforts going on in Kabul right now, but they have things going on in Mazar and in Herat, I believe. So there are a few big organizations who have not left the country and who will continue doing their work until they're not allowed to anymore.
Thanks, Jennifer and Robin. I'll also request you, both of you, to put in the names of the organizations that you mentioned on the chat, so we could also have them compiled and circulated for reference. And I'm sure some of the members of our audience would also like to have that for reference. There are some questions in the chat which I'd like for us to address now. But before that, Jennifer, if you could briefly introduce Zarifa, who was originally scheduled to be our third speaker for today. I know she was your student as well. If you could just acknowledge her by introducing her.
Certainly. So Zarifa was a student of mine when I was there. She was learning viola, and she's one of the brightest, most ambitious, unstoppable kids that I have ever met in my life. Basically her story was she decided that she was going to be a musician, and her family is a very conservative Hazara family, and they're like, what? Her dad is a refugee in Indonesia. Actually, he's the one who got my master's degree started. He's the catalyst for my research. And so Zarifa's mom somehow allowed her to do what she wanted, and she marched herself to the music school and demanded a meeting with my boss and said, I'm going to be a musician. And he said, well, you're too old to start here. I'm so sorry, you know, like you're far beyond the cutoff. And she said, I don't care. if you won't accept me now, I'm going to go learn music somewhere else and come back and you will accept me in 1 year. And she found, I think she like, I don't know how she got one of the teachers to teach her privately for about 6 months, and was able to pass all of the entrance exams. And while I was there, she got a scholarship to be, I can't remember what it was, but she went to do a leadership camp in Turkey, and then she went to Yale for a summer, and then she went on to become one of the first 2 female conductors of the Women's Orchestra. She's the one you saw conducting the orchestra at the World Economic Forum. She has given a TED Talk. She actually, once she got a scholarship to go study at the American University of Central Asia, she decided she needed to put her music on hold so that she could catch up her academics. And she is now studying political science and international human rights law, and decided, actually, because of the crisis right now, that she desperately needed music back in her life, and has now picked up the violin and is learning remotely violin.
Thanks, Jennifer. And I've just put up on chat the link to Zarifa's TED Talk. I wish we could meet her in person today, but do have a look at the talk later, because you can sense her energy, her passion for music, and her determination as a woman, an Afghan woman. There's some questions coming in from the audience, and I'll start with the first one. Javed Ahmadi asks, I was wondering how could we change the Taliban's views about music and art? I also noticed in Taliban propaganda videos that they seem to play music in the background. Would either of you wish to respond to that?
I actually just wrote a response in chat. I'm sorry, we'll just respond here instead. So if you don't mind, I'll start, Jennifer, on that one. My point would be to say that the Taliban will say one thing and do another. As I just wrote in the chat, they are really systematically executing people, including colleagues of one of my cases who worked in the previous government. They are physically harming, whether it's flogging or cutting off fingers, people who are even just associated with persons who are musicians or went to the school. So my personal opinion is that they're probably focused more on absolute power, and that they're probably not elevated as a whole in their persons or in their organization to make or uphold any meaningful human rights advances.
Thanks, Robin.
Yeah, to add to that, by the way, you know, over the past couple of weeks, they've come out and said, oh, we're a new Taliban. We're not like we were in the past. We've changed, we're different. And even some of my friends in Kabul, in those early days, I was calling everybody like, are you alive? Are you okay? What are you gonna do? Are you gonna leave? And several of my friends were like, no, I think I'm gonna stay. You know, my family's here, my work is here. And, you know, the Taliban say they're moderate. And they're different now. And I say to that, the way that they're different is that they have ironed their clothes and learned how to use the internet. And that's about it. I think that they have taken a page from the ISIS book, and have learned how to market themselves. They've washed their faces a bit, and now they're putting forth this PR campaign that they're this, the alternative to the corrupt Afghan government, and that they're good now, but they're not. They are not. And, you know, Zarifa not being here today is directly representative of that. The fact that Robin and I have spent the last month of our lives, like, up all night talking to people in country who are hiding out in basements and moving from safe house to safe house is proof enough that this is not a better Taliban. They're just spit shined, and that's about it.
Right. And I'd like to follow up on one more thing there, because Jennifer points out something else that's really important to understand. I think previously it was primarily the Taliban in power. And when I stayed at the guest house that I was at in 2014, one of the people that was working there mentioned, you know, the Taliban are great in the provinces. Like they make sure that court cases get through, they take care of our water irrigation rights. So on a small level, they may be able to take care of some meaningful infrastructure for people and be respected for that. But the Taliban are just one of many groups that are there. There's the Mujahideen, which never left. There's ISIS coming in, which has had a stronger foothold and has been educating students, especially along the border, for years and really desensitizing them. So there are videos of, you know, people going around in groups destroying buildings and property. And I think there's the Haqqani network. There are a lot of other groups that are probably coming in with the Taliban as kind of the brute force and the public face. But there's other groups that are coming in that are going to take advantage of this situation that are probably even more concerning, maybe not on the music front, but certainly on just the amount of destruction that could be wreaked in the area.
Thank you. Kiran's question is around UNESCO and UNHCR connections we could tap into, and I think both of you already spoke to that a little bit. I see Quentin has his hand raised. Quentin, would you like to unmute and speak?
Sure. So it's less a question than a small request. For people who are members of the Rotary Action Groups on refugees, forced displacement and migration, and the Fellowship on Global Development, I mean, many of them are asking themselves, as are others, I mean, how can we help, right? And you discussed that, both of you. And I know that there will be a few things in the chat. But if there was a way, and I know it's an additional request to you, but to put together a one-pager where you could mention both the options for a few organizations that you trust. I mean, for example, one of you mentioned you work for Catholic Charities. Well, I trust them, but there are others, right? How we can potentially help. And then you also mentioned that, which is true to some extent, for at least for some NGOs, that sometimes the bureaucracy takes a big chunk of the donations, and sometimes for those who don't need a tax receipt, it's better to go individually, right? But so if you could put together a one page that I could then share with all the members of the RAG and all the members of the Fellowship. And I know that we have many people registering who didn't come in today for whatever reason, but they are interested, right? And we get a lot of questions about how can we actually help. So anyway, I talked too long, but if you don't mind, since you really know the situation on the ground, if you can share what you believe are a few good NGOs and a few other ways, whether it's refugees who already have arrived, or whether it's people that we can help in some kind of informal way, perhaps through you in Afghanistan, I can then share that to the two memberships. So thank you.
Sure. And I think Jennifer and I can certainly work together in the next 24 hours to put that together. Lauren, who's also on this call, is working with me with the International Coalition for Afghan Musicians. And that group is exploring, we're a volunteer organization. We're not a nonprofit even, but we are exploring some avenues to not only keep musicians' information secure. We've established a storage vault where they can place their documents, their recordings, and retrieve them at any point in time and have that be a very secure location. But we're also looking at some fundraising options and just what's the best means by which we can disseminate funds. We're working with Beyond Skin in Ireland, which may be an opportunity for that. And as we get more details, we can certainly update you. So we'll provide an initial sheet, and then as we get more information, we can pass that along as well.
Thank you. I mean, we might not be able to raise much, but a teeny bit might still help. But thank you. Yes.
Absolutely.
You know what? Like I just said, even sending $10 US mobile phone credit makes a huge difference. It means that a family who is trying to cross the border has enough data to stay in touch with people outside the country so that they know how to get across the border. And once they cross into Pakistan, they know who to contact there. And without that $10 mobile phone credit, then they're lost. So I think every amount that can be raised is meaningful.
And I'll piggyback on that just to say that the phone credit in some of my cases has also been used then to offset their internet costs or sometimes their food purchases. So they can share credit with each other. And if they can't get food, maybe a neighbor can get food and bring it to them. So I'm keeping several single women head of households in food that way.
Right, and I actually didn't understand how that works. So if you could explain that in your one pager, that would be great. So thank you again.
Sure.
I see Kiran Singh Sira has his physical hand up. I don't know.
Yeah. Thanks, Rukmina. Thanks both of you for speaking as well and sharing your experiences. Just to build on that, and I put it in the chat, I just want to, the League of American Orchestras, which is obviously based in the United States, my colleague Heather Noonan, and they had a long-term, I think they've had a relationship institutionally with the Afghan Institute for Music. And Heather works as a direct liaison with the US government and advocacy for all the national orchestras in America, from the Kennedy Center to all over the nation. So I work with them on training, but I just wanted to point that out and connect with Heather. She's a really good person, and she's been collating a lot of resources for individuals. Another organization is City Law, based in New York City. And my colleague there, Saha Moradi, and she fled Afghanistan when she was a little girl. And so she's a US citizen now, but she's been working to do some advocacy work for artists in Afghanistan, particularly. So she's another person maybe to connect with. It's City Law, it's city as in, and then law as LORE as in folklore, urban law, traditional culture.
That's wonderful. I saw your note in the chat. And so one of the things I'd like to point out is that Lauren and I with ICFAM are working with kind of a separate set of musicians than what Anim is working with. So the Afghanistan National Institute of Music, which I think the League of American Orchestras is working with, as you mentioned, they, to my knowledge, are most focused on their current student body and some current teachers. The list of people outside of that we're trying to help is probably at least 300 strong, if not larger. So one of the things I had done was to reach back out to David Bilger at the Philadelphia Orchestra, which initially sounded interested in helping. And they said, well, actually, we're going through the League of American Orchestras initiative. And that's fantastic because Anim has great political clout and connections. And so they can do a lot for that group. But I want everybody here to understand it is not representative of the entirety of positions in Afghanistan. And so the people that do not have that political clout and that access, my concern is that it's a one-shot thing. Anim will get their resources, and again, God bless them and everything that they're doing, because they have helped at least some people get out, and they've got others that they're still trying to help get out. But there is a large group outside of that who are at risk as well, and more so because they don't have those connections.
When you do share the resources, would it be okay to get it from an email from Rukmini or someone? Because I'd love to, because I'm also with the American Folklore Society. So there's many scholars, cultural workers that are working to support folk and traditional artists wherever they are in the world, and value both the storytellers, the visual artists, the traditional artists, and the folk musicians. Mm-hmm. So I'd love to be able to share what you'll be able to, and your calls for action as well.
Kiran, and in fact, I think someone else on chat also had that question about compiling information on the chat. Yes, we can do that, and also add the information from Jennifer and Robin in terms of the organizations and people we could support, and we can have that mailed across to all the registrants to this call.
I'd like to just briefly, I wanted to mention one other resource in New York. There's the Artistic Freedom Initiative, which is helping people come over on O1 visas. Technically, this would be more like guest artists and performers that are at a very high stature. But I think that may be another organization, if you wanted to lend some support. They do have kind of that army of people who can help with the legal part of things, with connecting people with resources. So Artistic Freedom Initiative is another good one we'll put on that list.
Carol has on chat mentioned about her connection with music and her work as a musician. And her question is, how can I work with others to share and promote music for peace? And I'm sorry, Jennifer, I think I cut you off as well. So perhaps you want to respond to this and to what you were about to say.
Sorry, I'm just looking at Carol's comment in there. Okay, so actually this kind of ties into what I was saying. There are probably a lot of people on this call who are not in countries that are taking in Afghan refugees and for whom this is not a very in-your-face matter, I guess you could say. Like, for example, here in Hong Kong, Afghanistan is like a different universe and most people don't really know anything about this. I imagine if you're not in America or UK or Pakistan, Iran, you know, countries that are directly affected by this, this will dissipate fairly quickly. So, you know, I guess I will echo what Robin's contact said, you know, share the story of Afghan musicians. You know, this piece of music that Carol, you have written, share it everywhere and dedicate it to musicians in Afghanistan. And if you put it online, include the link for Afghanistan National Institute of Music, or include links to all of these things that we're sharing, and really push this narrative on people as much as you possibly can. You know, the squeaky wheel, right? If people don't continue sharing this story and the stories of Afghan musicians and Afghans in general, the world will very quickly move on and they will very quickly forget. And I guess, you know, what Robin and I have been trying to really hit home is that these are real people and a real culture. You know, I'm of the mindset that people can share their own stories. Like, there's no such thing as a voiceless person. Everybody has a voice. But in a context like Afghanistan, where, you know, the culture is being tightened and tightened and tightened, and, you know, what's next? Is the internet going to be restricted? When I was living there, every winter, the Taliban would blow up the internet lines coming down from Tajikistan without fail. And so we would be without connection to the outside world for, you know, 2 weeks, 3 weeks at a time. And it was the most unthinkable thing. We just didn't know what to do with ourselves. So it's not beyond the scope of reasoning to think that they would do this again. So yes, people there will still have their voices, but their means of communicating their stories it's potentially to be cut off. So it's up to people who care about the situation to make sure that all of those voices are completely amplified. So Carol, publish this, put it everywhere you possibly can, and talk about Afghanistan as much as you possibly can. Make people sick of you, because that's the only way that this story will not get buried, and a whole nation will not just get buried.
Yeah, I'd like to add on to that, Jennifer, that if you are in touch with people in Afghanistan, or if at some future point you become in touch with people in Afghanistan, note that security really is primary right now. So many of my people are still using Facebook, despite being told numerous times that is not a secure platform and you should not use that. There are some people that are working in our group that are starting to get a lot of fishy Facebook requests. So I'm not sure that the Taliban, you know, some of their people may be really skilled with this, but again, it's some of the other groups that are also coming in from Pakistan largely that do have those technological advances and are very easily able to infiltrate things. So we are currently using Proton Mail, which is encrypted end-to-end to talk to people through email. And we're using Signal primarily for any kind of messaging app because it's encrypted end-to-end and perhaps a little bit better than WhatsApp. Likewise, I'll just mention that if people are sending money to people via their phones or via Western Union, there may be some scrutiny on people's phones. Very often when somebody comes to a checkpoint, they're asked to not only show their paperwork, but then it's taken from them. Likewise, phones are being taken and scrutinized, or kept. So it's important for anybody that you know that's there to upload their information, their documents, everything like that. We've encouraged people, even just educational documents, upload them, keep them somewhere safe on the cloud, and then destroy them. Because when Taliban are doing door-to-door searches, they're looking for those proofs of education even, and that could lead people into trouble. So there's just a lot of layers of security that if you're working with somebody, you'll want to be aware of. And phone conversations in English are probably to be avoided as well because walls are thin.
Thanks, Robin and Jennifer. We've got about 5 minutes to close. Quentin, if you could come in into the conversation at this point. Quentin represents the Rotary Action Group for Refugees, who's also one of our event partners. And before we officially close, we'd love to have your voice in.
Well, I don't have too much to say. I mean, this was very interesting. I mean, the work you're both doing is impressive. The fact that you are able to help people, I mean, that you know is wonderful. So, I mean, we'll try to share the link to the recording more broadly for those who registered were not able to attend. I do look forward to your one-pager or whatever you do so that I can share that as well when we share the recording. I believe a lot of people want to help, even if it's a small bit, and they don't know how. So this was also very useful for that. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Quentin. We've got 4 minutes to go, unless that there are any more questions. Any last words from the both of you, Jennifer and Robin, and then we can close.
Well, I just want to say thank you, Rukmini and Spencer and Quentin, for giving us this platform, and for all of the participants. I'm not sure where you're all tuning in from, but it's very, very encouraging to see so many people. And I know that Rotary is huge and worldwide, and I'm just really grateful that you are all caring so much. Also, since this one keeps walking past, I wanted to show you, this cat came from Kabul and has traveled around the world with me. And when Lauren came onto the call, she was messaging, is that the Afghan cat that made it out of Afghanistan? You know, it's kind of heartbreaking that animals can make it out when people cannot. But I'm glad that she is here. But yeah, anyway, again, I'm just, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to us, and please share far and wide with your whole networks. Thank you.
And I will just amplify that again, it's been a very intense month, and to some extent very isolating. We've been working, as Jennifer said, morning and night. I mean, I start my morning texting people, and I'm trying to do that during the day a little bit while I'm at work as much as I can. And then at nighttime, they're awake because of the 17.5-hour time difference. And my sister has joined me in this cause in Utah, and we've got some traction there with possibly being able to find a community that might be able to help support some people if we can get them over here, if we can find those sponsors for those visas and or institutions to help with them as well. Just knowing that there are other people that care and that are curious about the situation and that are willing to be open to educating themselves a little more fully about, you know, small things like security details and communications, or larger things like what has been the trajectory of music and the arts in Kabul and in Afghanistan. We really appreciate your attendance and your questions, and look forward to hopefully continuing the conversation. It would be lovely if this wasn't just a one and done. We provide you a one sheet and you walk off with it, but rather perhaps we have some opportunity to continue to partner together.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jennifer and Robin. And yeah, certainly, Robin, this is not a one-off. Our intention at the Rotary Peace Fellows Alumni Association has been to have these conversations that eventually lead up to action. So the conversation around Afghanistan began sometime last month, where we began with a conversation amongst Peace Fellows. So that was a closed group conversation where we spoke to about 5 Peace Fellows who are currently based in Afghanistan to get a sense of what the situation on the ground is. This was the second conversation in the series where we're inching towards action. And we're already working on a third conversation where we are also hoping to look at the voices that have not been heard so far, and you know, also looking at, can we in some ways hear the Taliban side of the story and bring them into the dialogue. So that's where this is going. So thanks everyone for being here. Please stay tuned to us at the Peace Fellows Alumni Association. I've posted up a Facebook page link on the chat right now. And we hope that all of us together are able to not just listen to Afghanistan at this point in time, but also very actively continue to work with Afghans and support them on the ground as they go through this very tough time. So thank you so much, and hope to see you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.